The Unity's edge drifted through the stars, its engines humming quietly as the massive ship glided toward its next destination. Aboard this marvel of interspecies cooperation, various species worked side by side. But there was one scientist, a Zitharian named Dr. Ilara Tava, who had spent months focusing on just one particular human trait: human reproduction. She wasn't interested in it for any romantic reason, though. Ilara was a xenobiologist, a scientist fascinated by the biology of different species. To her, human reproduction was a strange puzzle that she simply had to solve. Humans were unlike any other species she had studied. Their physiology seemed so fragile compared to her own race, but their reproductive method was unlike anything the Zitharians had ever seen. Zitharians reproduced through complex genetic synthesis, a clinical and sterile process. But humans did things differently. It was messy, unpredictable, and deeply emotional. These aspects intrigued Ilara. How could such a chaotic process result in the continuation of their species? Ilara had read all the data. She had studied the reports, seen the holovids, and listened to the briefings from her human colleagues. But there was one thing she had never been able to do: experience human reproduction firsthand. And that's where Commander Nathan Cole came in. Nathan was a human officer aboard the Unity's Edge, known for his bravery, leadership, and sense of humor. He had dealt with his fair share of strange requests over the years, but nothing like this. Ilara's request was simple, but at the same time, it felt like something out of an alien sci-fi movie. It all started during a routine meeting in the ship's science lab. Ilara had been going over the latest data when Nathan walked in, his usual calm demeanor filling the room. "Commander, I need your help with an experiment," Ilara said, her voice serious and focused as always. Nathan raised an eyebrow, instantly suspicious. "An experiment, huh? What kind of experiment?" Ilara looked up from her tablet, her bright purple eyes locking onto his. "I would like to study human reproduction in its natural form. The biological process." Nathan blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. "But did I hear you correctly? You want me to help you with that?" Ilara nodded, her expression unchanging. "Yes, I have reviewed all the data, but I need to understand it from a more experiential perspective. Human biology is complex, and your species' method of reproduction is unlike anything my people use. I would like to study it directly." Nathan stood there for a moment, trying to wrap his head around the request. He had heard of alien species being curious about human ways, but this was something else entirely. "So, you want me to help you understand how humans reproduce?" "Yes," Ilara confirmed. "In detail. I have studied your biology and reproductive systems through simulations, but the process cannot be truly understood through data alone. I need a first-hand observation, preferably with a willing participant." Nathan stared at her, his face slowly turning red. "I think I'm going to need more details here." Ilara continued, her tone completely serious. "Of course, I understand your hesitation. Human reproduction requires physical contact, I assume. I believe the term sex is used. I can observe this process to understand it better. I would, of course, have all necessary precautions in place and ensure that no harm comes to either of us." Nathan's head was spinning now. It wasn't just the subject matter. It was how utterly casual Ilara was about it. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't even slightly awkward. She was treating it like a simple science experiment. And that made Nathan feel incredibly uncomfortable. Okay, hold on a minute here," he said, holding up a hand. "You're asking me to..." He paused, unsure of how to put it. "You're asking me to what?" "Take part in an experiment on human reproduction. You want me to, what? Show you how humans, do it." Ilara nodded once, seemingly oblivious to the intensity of the situation. "Exactly. I must admit, I've read the literature, but reading and experiencing are two very different things. It's the only way I can truly understand the emotional and physiological aspects of human reproduction. I would need your assistance, Commander. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. This was beyond awkward. How was he supposed to respond to something like this? I don't even know how this works. Human reproduction isn't exactly a casual thing, he said, stammering a bit. You're talking about something very personal here, Ilara. It's not the kind of thing you just do for science. Ilara tilted her head, her purple skin shimmering slightly in the lab's fluorescent light. I understand that it is personal for humans. That is precisely why I need to observe it. Your species' emotional bond during reproduction is crucial to its success, and it is something I wish to study firsthand. Nathan's mind was racing. There had to be some way to back out of this without being rude. But Ilara wasn't backing down. She seemed completely serious, and there was no sense of embarrassment in her eyes. Just scientific curiosity. You've really thought this through, huh? Nathan asked, trying to buy some time. Indeed, Ilara said with a slight nod. I believe this experiment will provide invaluable insight into the human condition. I have studied Zetharian reproduction, which is purely genetic and logical. But humans are something entirely different. Nathan took a deep breath. All right, I'm going to need some time to think about this. And some ground rules, he added, trying to regain some control over the situation. Ilara smiled, her expression brightening. Of course, I will respect any boundaries you wish to set, but know that the data I can gather will be of great benefit to interspecies relations. Nathan rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. This was going to be one strange, awkward experiment. He had no idea how to get out of it now. But one thing was certain. His life was about to get a lot more complicated. The next few days aboard Unity's Edge were filled with awkwardness for Commander Nathan Cole. After Ilara's request, he had spent hours pacing his quarters, unsure of what to do. He tried to tell himself that it was just a science experiment, nothing more. But every time he thought about it, his face flushed red with embarrassment. Meanwhile, Ilara seemed completely unaffected by any of it. She continued her work as though nothing had happened. In fact, she became even more focused on the topic of human reproduction. Her quarters were now filled with data pads, books, and holovids about human relationships and intimacy. She studied them all with the same cold scientific approach she used for everything else. One afternoon, Nathan received an unexpected visit from Ilara. She walked into his office, a tablet in her hand, her expression serious as always. "Commander," she said, not even bothering to knock. "I've been reviewing human courtship rituals, but I'm having some difficulties understanding the emotional elements involved. I need your assistance again." Nathan looked up from his desk, startled. "Ilara, I told you, I'm still thinking about your request. This isn't something you just rush into." Ilara didn't seem to notice his discomfort. "I understand. But I've come to the conclusion that to fully comprehend human reproduction, I must first understand how humans form relationships. I need to study how you experience these emotions before moving forward." Nathan opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. There was no use. He knew Ilara wasn't going to drop this anytime soon. "All right, what exactly do you need help with?" "I've been watching human holovids," she said, her purple eyes glowing slightly as she held up her tablet. "But they are not as informative as I'd hoped. The actors portray emotions, but the reactions are exaggerated. I need a more direct study. Could you explain the process to me?" Nathan stared at her, trying to figure out if she was joking. But Ilara's expression remained as serious as ever. "Explain what, exactly? How humans fall in love?" "Yes," Ilara said, nodding. "Humans seem to undergo an emotional transformation when they become romantically involved. It appears to be essential to reproduction. But I do not fully understand the physiological and psychological processes that take place. Your holovids do not provide the data I need." Nathan sighed, rubbing his forehead. You're asking me to give you a lesson on human emotions. I don't think I'm qualified for that, Ilara. She tilted her head, unfazed. You're a human. You have experienced these emotions firsthand. Surely you can describe them. Sure, I've experienced them, Nathan said, starting to get frustrated. But love and relationships aren't just scientific processes. There's a lot of personal stuff involved. It's not something I can just explain in a few sentences. Ilara didn't seem to grasp his discomfort. Could you give me an example of a typical human romantic interaction? Nathan stared at her. You want me to demonstrate how I fall in love with someone? He asked incredulously. Ilara nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Yes, I've been trying to understand it from a logical standpoint, but I need to see it in practice. How do you humans form such strong emotional bonds? Nathan took a deep breath, realizing there was no easy way out of this. Okay, fine. But let's get something straight first. There's no single correct way humans form romantic bonds. It's not all about physical attraction or shared interests. There's an emotional connection that happens naturally, something you can't just plan for. Ilara listened intently, clearly processing every word. I see. So it's not a controlled process like Zetherian bonding. No, Nathan said with a chuckle. Definitely not. Humans don't work that way. Sometimes you meet someone and it clicks. Other times you might never feel that way about them. Ilara's eyes narrowed as she thought about this. So humans rely on something unpredictable. Exactly, Nathan said. That's what makes it both beautiful and complicated. Ilara took a moment to absorb his words. This emotional unpredictability. It seems inefficient, but at the same time, I understand why it's crucial to human reproduction. Without that bond, the physical process might not succeed. Nathan was starting to get a little more comfortable with the conversation, but he still didn't know how to explain the deeper aspects of human relationships. It's not just about reproduction, Ilara. Love and connection are about trust, companionship, and, well, feeling something real. It's not always perfect. People argue, get hurt, and sometimes drift apart. But when it works, it's something special. Ilara didn't respond immediately. She was clearly deep in thought, processing Nathan's words. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer than usual. So, humans experience both joy and pain in these relationships, she asked, her tone thoughtful. And yet you continue to seek them out. Yeah, Nathan said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. That's the thing. Despite all the ups and downs, we keep looking for connection. We need it. There was a pause as Ilara processed his response. I understand, she said quietly. You humans are more complex than I originally thought. Before Nathan could respond, Ilara turned to leave. But she stopped at the door, glancing back at him. I'm grateful for your assistance, Commander. This has been enlightening. I'll continue my research on human emotional bonds and their role in reproduction. Nathan watched her leave, a sense of relief washing over him. It had been a strange conversation, but maybe he was starting to understand Ilara's perspective a little better. She wasn't just curious about human reproduction. She was trying to understand the emotional depth that made humans who they were. And that thought left him with a strange feeling. For the first time, he wondered if there was something more to her interest in humans than pure science. For the next several weeks, Commander Nathan Cole and Dr. Ilara Tava found themselves in an unexpected routine. Nathan was teaching Ilara about human relationships, everything from how humans express emotions to why they seek connections with one another. The more he explained, the more Ilara seemed intrigued by the emotional aspects of humanity, though there was still a part of her that couldn't fully understand it. Ilara wasn't the type of person to give up easily, and Nathan couldn't help but admire her determination. But her approach was so clinical, so scientific, that sometimes it felt like she was treating love and relationships like lab experiments. She didn't seem to grasp the messiness and unpredictability of it all. One afternoon, Ilara knocked on Nathan's door again, a serious expression on her face. She had been doing her usual research, but now she wanted to take things to the next level. Nathan opened the door, and as usual, he braced himself for whatever strange request was coming. "Commander," Ilara began, not wasting any time, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've said. I understand that human emotions aren't always logical or predictable, but I'm still struggling to grasp why humans form such strong emotional bonds. I've read about it, but reading and experiencing are two different things." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you want to experience emotions, Ilara? You're a Zitharian, and emotions aren't exactly part of your species' makeup." Ilara nodded, her purple eyes glowing with a determined light. "I realize this, Commander, but I believe that understanding these bonds could help me better understand human reproduction, and it might help me improve the Zitharian methods as well." Nathan sighed. He'd been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it any easier. "All right, I get it. But what do you need from me?" Ilara's eyes lit up with excitement. "I want to observe a human romantic relationship firsthand. Not just the biological part, but the emotional one as well. Could you help me by introducing me to a couple of your crewmates? I'd like to see how they interact." Nathan was stunned. "You want me to introduce you to couples? Ilara, you're asking me to get involved in their private lives. That's a little invasive, don't you think?" Ilara didn't seem to understand the issue. "I will only observe, Commander. I promise not to interfere. I simply need to see how emotional bonds form in real time." Nathan rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Okay, let me think about it," he said, trying to buy himself some time. "I'll find a few couples who are willing to let you observe. But you need to promise me something. No experimentation, no taking notes, just watching and learning." Ilara nodded eagerly. "Understood. I will observe, but not interfere." A few days later, Nathan had managed to convince a few crewmates to allow Ilara to observe their relationships. There was Tasha and Lewis, who had been together for 2 years, and Alina and Mark, who were just starting to date. Nathan knew both couples well, and he trusted them to handle Ilara's unusual presence. The first session took place in the mess hall, where the couples gathered for dinner. Ilara sat at a corner table, her purple eyes scanning the room. Nathan had briefed everyone on what to expect, but there was still an air of nervousness in the room. Tasha and Lewis were seated at one table, laughing and talking like any couple who had been together for a while. Ilara watched them closely, her eyes fixed on every small gesture. The way Tasha gently touched Lewis's hand, the way Lewis smiled at her when she spoke. These were things Ilara had read about, but seeing them in person was a whole new experience. "This is fascinating," Ilara whispered to Nathan, her voice filled with awe. "The way they communicate with each other without words. There is something comforting in their actions." Nathan smiled, feeling a bit more at ease. "Yeah, they've been together for a while. It's like they've developed their own language, just between the two of them." Ilara nodded, but she didn't stop observing. She was paying attention to everything. The way the couples interacted, how they expressed affection, and how they comforted each other when one seemed down. For a while, she sat in silence, processing the information. After a while, she turned to Nathan. "I think I'm starting to understand. There's a connection between them, something deeper than just physical attraction. They rely on each other for emotional support, and it seems to be essential for their well-being." Nathan nodded, impressed by how quickly Ilara was picking things up. "Exactly. It's not just about the physical side of things. It's about trust, loyalty, and emotional connection. Without that, human relationships don't work." The second couple, Alina and Mark, were newer to each other, still in the early stages of their relationship. They were more awkward than the first couple, their hands brushing occasionally as they tried to navigate the delicate dance of getting to know one another. Ilara studied them with intense focus. The interaction between them is different. There's uncertainty in their movements, hesitation. They're not as comfortable with each other yet. Nathan smiled softly. Yeah, that's how it is in the beginning. You're not sure of each other, so there's a lot of testing the waters. But once they get comfortable, it'll be like second nature. Ilara took careful notes in her mind, making mental comparisons between the two couples. She was fascinated by the way human emotions shifted and changed, how they developed over time and under different circumstances. As the night went on, Ilara's fascination grew. She watched, learned, and slowly began to understand that love wasn't just a logical connection. It was a complex, evolving relationship that took time, patience, and vulnerability. By the end of the evening, Ilara was silent, deep in thought. Nathan could tell that she was processing everything she had seen. Well, he said, breaking the silence, what do you think? Do you get it now? Ilara looked up at him, her eyes bright with realization. I think I do. Humans are incredibly complex. Their emotional connections are unlike anything I've ever studied. Nathan smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Yeah, we humans are full of surprises. Ilara nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. I may never fully understand human emotions, but I can appreciate their significance. I've learned more than I expected tonight. Nathan watched as Ilara sat back in her chair, lost in thought. He knew that the journey wasn't over yet, but maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand what made humanity so special. The following week, Ilara's understanding of human emotions seemed to deepen. She spent hours in the observation room, studying data from her interactions with Nathan and the couples. Yet, despite her growing comprehension, something was still missing. Something intangible that couldn't be captured in numbers and charts. For the first time in her scientific career, Ilara began to question whether she could truly understand humans simply by observing. Nathan, on the other hand, had been getting used to her strange requests. He had even grown to appreciate their conversations. It wasn't every day that a highly intelligent, emotionless scientist asked questions about relationships, love, and connection. Ilara had a way of making even the most awkward situations feel like a normal part of their lives. But as the days went by, Ilara's behavior began to shift. She became quieter, more reflective. There was a different energy about her whenever she looked at Nathan, an energy that Nathan couldn't quite place. At first, he thought it was just a result of her continued research. But the way she seemed to study him, the way her gaze lingered a little too long, started to make him uneasy. One evening, after another session, where she had observed the emotional interactions between a few more crewmates, Ilara approached Nathan in the ship's common area. She seemed distracted, her usual sharp focus replaced with something else, something softer. Commander Cole, she began, her voice unusually hesitant. I've been thinking. Nathan looked up from his datapad, sensing something was different in the way she spoke. About what? Ilara hesitated, glancing around as if she wasn't sure whether she should continue. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. I believe I'm beginning to understand human emotions better now, at least from an observational standpoint. But there's something I've been struggling with. There's a part of human connection that cannot be explained by logic, by observation, or by data. Nathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the shift in her tone. What do you mean? Ilara stepped closer, her purple eyes intense but uncertain. There's a sensation that humans experience. It's more than just attachment or love. It's an urge to be close to someone, an instinct that drives humans to seek out physical closeness as part of their emotional bond. I've seen it many times, but I still don't fully understand it. Nathan's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what Ilara was talking about. The desire for intimacy wasn't something he could explain in scientific terms. It was something you just felt, something deep and personal. It's not just physical closeness, Nathan said quietly. It's about trust. When two people get close like that, they share something vulnerable. It's more than just being near each other. It's a kind of understanding, a willingness to be seen for who you really are, flaws and all. Ilara's expression softened as she listened, absorbing his words. I think I understand that. But the urge to be close to someone physically, to share that space, it seems essential to human emotional bonding. I cannot explain why, but I feel it too. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. Wait, you feel it? You mean? I'm not sure what it is, Ilara admitted, her voice quieter now. But when I observe these connections, when I watch two people grow closer, I begin to feel something, a desire to understand it more deeply. I feel an urge to experience it myself, to see what it's like for a human. Nathan swallowed hard, his mind racing. Could it be possible? Was Ilara, the cool, logical scientist, actually experiencing the very emotion she had been studying? And why was she talking about it in such an intimate way? He took a step back, trying to keep his composure. Ilara, I don't think you fully realize what you're asking. This isn't something you just experience in a lab. It's personal. It's messy. And it's not just about observing. You can't really understand it until you're in it, feeling it yourself. Ilara's eyes seemed to darken with a mix of confusion and curiosity. But I want to understand it. I need to understand it. I've seen humans form such strong connections. It's not just about the biology. It's about emotions, about wanting to share something with another person. I believe this is why human reproduction is so complex. Without the emotional bond, the physical process might fail. Nathan paused, realizing she wasn't just talking about science anymore. There was something more personal in her voice now, something he hadn't expected. Ilara, he said, his voice quiet but firm, I'm not sure you should be pursuing this further. You're asking about something that goes beyond data. It's about trust, vulnerability, and yes, physical closeness, but it's more than just biology. It's about emotions you can't control. Ilara looked at him, her expression unreadable. I understand that. But I feel that in order to fully understand humans, I must experience it. I cannot just observe. I need to know what it feels like. Nathan's heart raced as he realized that Ilara wasn't just asking for an academic experiment anymore. She was asking for something deeper, something more personal. He knew it wasn't just about science now. And it wasn't just about him. Ilara was stepping into unknown territory, territory where science and emotions collided. She was starting to feel something real, something that could change everything. The air between them thickened with the unspoken words hanging in the space. Nathan took a deep breath. Ilara, I don't know what to say. Ilara took a step closer, her voice barely a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Commander. I just wanted you to understand what I'm feeling. The silence stretched, and for the first time, Nathan wasn't sure how to react. Ilara was no longer just the curious scientist. She had become something else, something more human than he ever thought possible. The days after Ilara's confession weighed heavily on Nathan. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. Ilara, the scientist who had once seen humans as nothing more than a subject to study, was now talking about feeling emotions, real, raw emotions. He had always thought of her as distant, a being who didn't understand the chaos of human feelings. But now it was clear she was experiencing something much more complicated than he had anticipated. Ilara had always been focused, driven by logic and reason. She had approached everything with a scientific mind, analyzing and measuring, breaking things down into predictable patterns. But now she was talking about emotions as though they were something she needed to experience. She wanted to understand human relationships at a level that went beyond observation. She wanted to feel them for herself. The problem was, Nathan didn't know how to handle it. He knew what it was like to be in a relationship, to feel attraction, love, and the overwhelming need to be close to someone. But he also knew how complicated those feelings could be. He wasn't sure if he could, or should, help Ilara experience them. The following days, they continued to interact as usual. Ilara asked questions, observed human behavior, and studied relationships. But there was a subtle shift between them. Nathan could sense that Ilara was searching for something more than just data. He couldn't quite explain it, but he noticed it in the way she looked at him sometimes, as though she was seeing him in a new light. One evening, as they were working together in the command center, Ilara broke the silence. "Commander, I've been thinking again." Nathan didn't look up from his work but gave a small nod. "About what?" "I'm beginning to understand that human relationships are not just about emotions," Ilara continued, her voice steady, but with an underlying uncertainty. "There's a physical aspect as well. I feel it too, but I'm not sure why." Nathan paused, the words striking him like a punch to the gut. "Ilara, what do you mean by that?" She didn't meet his eyes, instead focusing on the display in front of her. "When I observe the connections between humans, I feel something stirring inside me. I feel drawn to them, like I need to be closer to experience that bond myself. I've read about human intimacy, but reading is not the same as feeling." Nathan felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure if Ilara understood what she was saying, or worse, if she didn't fully realize the implications of her words. "Ilara, this isn't something you can just study and experiment with. It's not just data. You can't predict what's going to happen when you start feeling things." Ilara looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. "I don't think I'd fully understand what I'm feeling, Commander. I only know that it's real. And I know I want to understand it, to experience it." Nathan swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "But Ilara, human intimacy, love, it's messy. It's not something you can control. It's full of complications, mistakes, and sometimes even pain. You can't just decide to experience it like a scientific experiment." "I'm not trying to make it a science experiment," she replied softly, her voice almost pleading. "I'm trying to understand it from the inside. I've spent my entire life analyzing things from the outside. I want to know what it feels like, not just what it looks like." Nathan could hear the raw sincerity in her voice, and for the first time, he realized how deeply she was struggling with this. Ilara wasn't just asking about human relationships from a clinical perspective anymore. She was asking to be a part of something real, something she couldn't fully understand, but something she felt drawn to experience. But Nathan wasn't sure if he could be the one to help her. He had never imagined this situation. He didn't want to risk crossing boundaries, especially with someone who didn't fully understand the complexity of human emotions. He had seen relationships fail, people get hurt, and he didn't want to add to that pain, especially with someone as vulnerable as Ilara seemed to be becoming. "Ilara," Nathan said, his voice softer now, "I don't think you understand how serious this is. Intimacy isn't just about being close to someone physically. It's about trust, vulnerability, and a whole lot of emotion. You can't just decide to be part of it." Ilara nodded slowly, her face conflicted. "I understand. I don't know how to explain it. I feel like I need to experience this. I feel something pulling me, and it's not just curiosity. It's deeper than that." Nathan took a deep breath, trying to make sense of everything. Ilara was asking for something that couldn't be explained, but he wasn't sure if he could give it to her. "This is a dangerous path, Ilara. If you're not ready for what comes with these feelings, it could hurt you, and it could hurt me too." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked away, her eyes focused on something far off. Nathan could see the conflict in her, this battle between her logical, scientific mind and the overwhelming emotions she was starting to experience. She had always prided herself on being in control, on understanding things from a rational perspective. But now, she was asking to step into a world where control was an illusion. "I know it's complicated," Ilara said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "But I think I need to understand this. I need to know what it's like to connect with someone on a deeper level, to feel what humans feel." Nathan stared at her, his mind spinning. He didn't know what to do. He didn't want to risk hurting her. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't just asking to study love anymore. She was asking to experience it, to be part of it. For the first time, Nathan realized just how much Ilara had changed. She wasn't the detached scientist anymore. She was someone searching for something real, something that could change everything. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't know if I can be the one to help you with this." She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. "I understand, Commander. I just wanted you to know." And with that, she turned and left, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Nathan stood there, staring at the door she had closed behind her, unsure of what was to come next. The days that followed were quieter, more reflective. Nathan and Ilara continued their duties aboard the ship, but the tension between them had shifted. They no longer had the deep conversations they once shared, the ones that had made Nathan feel like he was unlocking new sides of Ilara's personality. Instead, their interactions became more formal, more professional. She was still studying human behavior, still observing relationships. But now there was a distance, a wall that Nathan wasn't sure how to break through. Nathan couldn't help but replay the conversation in his mind over and over. He kept telling himself that it wasn't his responsibility to help Ilara with her emotional confusion. She was a scientist, a logical being. This whole idea of needing to feel human emotions was outside of her expertise, outside of what she could control. But as the days wore on, Nathan found it harder to ignore the change in Ilara. There was something in her eyes, a quiet desperation, a longing for something more than knowledge. He had seen it before, in the eyes of people who were falling in love or experiencing intense emotions for the first time. It was the look of someone who didn't know how to deal with feelings they hadn't expected. One evening, when Nathan was alone in the mess hall, working through reports, he noticed Ilara walking in. She was holding herself differently, more closed off, almost as if she was carrying a weight on her shoulders. He saw her glance in his direction, but she didn't approach. Instead, she quietly sat down at a table near the window, her eyes focused on the stars outside. Nathan hesitated. He knew he should give her space, but something inside him told him this might be his chance to speak to her, to understand what was really going on. He stood up, walking over to her table, unsure of what he was going to say. "Ilara," he said softly as he reached her side. She didn't look up immediately, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. After a long moment, she slowly raised her head, her purple eyes meeting his. "Commander," she said quietly, her voice calm but distant. "I didn't expect you to come over." Nathan pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He could feel the weight of the silence between them, both of them searching for the right words. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice steady but unsure, "about what you said, about wanting to feel what humans feel. I don't have all the answers, but maybe I've been wrong to push you away from it." Ilara's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak immediately. She seemed to be processing his words, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust them. "You've been studying us for so long," Nathan continued, "but emotions aren't something that can be explained with logic alone. I think I underestimated how important it is for you to experience them, not just observe them." Ilara's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, Nathan saw a small hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "I didn't know how to explain it, Commander. It's not just curiosity anymore. I feel like there's something inside me that needs to connect with others, to understand what that bond is like." Nathan leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "I get it," he said after a moment. "You want to understand human relationships, but not just from the outside. You want to be a part of it, to feel what it's really like." Ilara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been watching humans form connections for so long, but it's not the same as feeling them myself. I thought that if I could just understand the biology, the science behind it, it would be enough. But it's not." Nathan could see how torn she was. The logical, precise side of her was battling with something deeper, something she couldn't control. He understood that struggle all too well. After all, he had felt that same pull toward connection, toward something more than just physical proximity. It was a desire that couldn't be explained by science. It was something you just had to feel. Ilara, Nathan said carefully, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, about what you said, and I've realized that maybe I was too focused on the risks and not enough on, well, what you need. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? Nathan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking about what it means to be close to someone, and I understand why you want to experience it. I don't think it's wrong to want to understand that connection, but it's not something that can be forced. You can't just study it. It's something that happens naturally, between people who trust each other. Ilara's eyes searched his face, looking for something he wasn't sure how to give her. She seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as though considering every possibility. I know, she said finally. I'm not asking for it to be forced, but I don't know where to begin. How do I know if I'm ready? How do I even start? Nathan didn't have a perfect answer for that. He wasn't sure how to help her navigate emotions he himself had trouble understanding. But he did know one thing. If Ilara was willing to open herself up to this, to take the risk, then he had to be there for her. Not just as a commander or a scientist, but as someone who had experienced what she was searching for. I can't give you all the answers, Nathan said softly, but I can help you find your way. If you're really ready to experience this, I think the first step is trusting yourself, and trusting that it's okay to feel what you're feeling, even if you don't have all the answers. Ilara was quiet for a long time, her eyes thoughtful. Then, for the first time in days, a small, uncertain smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I think I might be ready, she whispered. To feel. To trust. Nathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Ilara wasn't just observing anymore. She was ready to experience the complexities of human emotions, and that, he realized, was the most important step. As they sat together in silence, both of them staring out the window at the stars, Nathan knew that this was just the beginning of something much deeper, something neither of them could fully predict. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments and new realizations. Ilara and Nathan had reached a new understanding. She had admitted her feelings and her desire to experience human emotions firsthand. Nathan, though hesitant at first, had accepted that Ilara's journey wasn't something he could stop. In a way, it felt like a new chapter for both of them. They still spent their time aboard the ship, going about their duties, but there was a subtle change in their interactions. Their conversations were no longer just about data and observations. They began to talk more about feelings, about the messy, unpredictable nature of human relationships. Ilara was beginning to open up more, not just to Nathan, but to herself. She started acknowledging the emotion she had been trying to understand for so long. Every moment she spent with Nathan, whether it was a casual conversation or a shared task, seemed to bring her closer to the emotional connection she was searching for. One evening, as the crew gathered in the common area to relax after a long day, Nathan found himself sitting at a table with Ilara. The others were laughing and talking in the background, but Ilara remained quiet, her thoughts distant. Nathan noticed that she had been lost in her own mind lately, as if she was trying to figure out where to go from here. Hey, Nathan said, giving her a small nudge. You all right? Ilara looked up at him, blinking as if coming out of a trance. She gave him a soft smile, one that was almost shy. Yes, I'd just been thinking. Nathan leaned back in his chair, intrigued. About what? Ilara hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure if she should share her thoughts. Finally, she spoke. I'm starting to realize how much I've been avoiding feelings. Emotions have always felt like something I could control, something I could study. But now, I can't control them. They're messy, complicated. Nathan smiled softly, nodding in understanding. That's the nature of emotions. You can't control them. They just happen. And sometimes, that's the scariest part. Ilara looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of her drink absent-mindedly. "I've been afraid to really feel them, I think. Afraid of what might happen if I let them take control. But now I see that maybe that's the only way to truly understand them." Nathan's heart ached a little as he saw the vulnerability in Ilara's eyes. It wasn't just her curiosity anymore. It wasn't just a scientific question she was trying to answer. She was genuinely trying to connect, to experience what she had only observed from a distance. And that, Nathan realized, was more powerful than anything. "You don't have to do it all at once," Nathan said gently. "Taking that first step, just being open to it, that's already progress. You don't need to have it all figured out." Ilara nodded slowly, a faint trace of relief crossing her face. "I think I'm ready to take that step." The next few days were filled with small, tentative moments. Ilara began to engage more with the crew, asking questions about their relationships, but in a way that felt more personal. She wasn't just studying them anymore. She was learning from them, trying to understand how emotions and connections really worked. One afternoon, while Nathan was working in the command center, Ilara came to find him. This time, she wasn't there with a question about human behavior. She was there for something else, something that felt more real. "Commander," she began, her voice steady, but with a hint of uncertainty, "I've been thinking about what you said, about trusting myself, and I think I want to take the next step, with you." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant at first. He had been with many people in his life, had formed close bonds, but this felt different. He had to remind himself that Ilara was still exploring something new, something that wasn't just about science. "Ilara," Nathan said carefully, "are you sure? You don't have to rush into anything." Ilara met his gaze, her eyes full of sincerity. "I'm not rushing. I think I'm ready to experience something real. To trust in something I can't control, but something I can feel." Nathan stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing. This was no longer about teaching Ilara what it meant to be human. This was about sharing something with her, something that was deeply personal. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was about connection. He took a deep breath, his voice quiet but steady. "I think we're both ready. But remember, this isn't an experiment. This is real. And it's messy, like you said. We might not have all the answers." Ilara nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "I don't need all the answers. I just want to experience it. With you." Nathan's heart raced, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of hope. It wasn't just about the science, or the curiosity, or even the connection. It was about trust. Trust that they could take this step together, without knowing exactly where it would lead. They spent the next few hours together, talking in a way they hadn't before, openly, honestly. It was a quiet kind of intimacy, one built on the foundation of trust and vulnerability. Ilara wasn't just observing anymore. She was truly experiencing what it meant to connect with another person, to be part of something more than herself. As the evening came to a close, Ilara turned to Nathan with a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan smiled, his heart full. "You don't need to thank me. We're doing this together." And in that moment, as they shared a simple, quiet connection, Nathan realized something profound. Ilara hadn't just learned what it meant to feel human emotions. She had taught him something too, about the power of vulnerability, and how sometimes the most beautiful connections are the ones that aren't controlled or understood, but simply felt.